Good evening. My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome back to our Friday night Q&A. We do this fun little show once per month where Kelly and I take some questions from our Patreon supporters, as well as a few questions from chat. And tonight, what are we talking about, Kelly?
Tonight, we are talking about all things Drakenheim. If you are unaware, Monty and I have announced a book recently. So we are going to be making a book of Dungeons of Drakenheim. We're partnering with Ghostfire Games, and we are hoping to produce this book in 2021. There will be a Kickstarter launched, and we're going to have more news about that, which we have a mailing list right now that you can join. And is that link down below for the
It's easy.
list?
You just have to go to Drakkenheim.com.
Oh, there it is. So if you go to Dragonheim.com, you can actually join the mailing list to make sure that you are up to date on all of the information regarding our Kickstarter that we are working on. Monty and I have been very hard at work working on this for actually the past little while in secret.
Yeah, I would say we probably started seriously working on this about 6 months ago.
Yeah.
But like it's been something that has been building for years now. So we've known we wanted to do it, but it's really exciting. We started chatting with the awesome folks at Ghostfire Games, and they let us know that they were interested in doing it, and working together on making this a reality. And so we'll be launching the Kickstarter sometime in probably the latter half of mid 2021. So with all these things, it's not always an exact science. We don't have like, this is the date, because if we said this is the day, we would miss that day.
Yeah, we don't want to cyberpunk this.
Yeah.
So we aren't announcing official dates until we know for sure that we can deliver on those dates, but we are expecting mid 2021 is when the Kickstarter will go live. And a little while after, hopefully you all can get your hands on the book.
Yeah. So
yeah,
it's a big project. It's going to be based on season 1 of our live stream campaign. So for those of you that have followed along with Dungeons of Drakenheim and have always wondered how things could have gone differently with different characters or characters of your own, or have been captivated by that world and want to decide the fate of Drakenheim for yourself, and maybe discover a few of the unsolved mysteries along the way, this will be your ticket to do that.
Yeah, so we've gotten a lot of questions, and it's actually great. We've gotten questions about the campaign, the Kickstarter campaign, and what's going to be in the book. But we've also gotten questions just about Drakenheim in general, and also questions involving how we handled Drakenheim as a homebrew world. So there's questions about what tools and advice we have regarding homebrewing your own world and creating your own campaign. So we'll kind of work through those questions. And then at the end of this, we're going to hopefully have a lot of time left to toss it to the chat to ask questions as well. So we ask that if you do have questions and you're watching this, wait until we are done with the patron-specific questions, and then write in the chat, and we'll let you know when. And start it with capital letters question when we do get to that point. So should we jump in?
Yeah, I think we should. So we've got some questions from our awesome patrons. Kelly, what's your first pick?
So we'll get started with questions about the actual book that we are working on. I have a question here from Clifton P, who asks, how did you come up with Delirium? Monty, this is your brain baby, so yeah, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, so I can't really say that I came up with Delirium, because the truth of the matter is magic space rocks is a well-established fantasy trope. And there was a ton of inspiration for the idea of magic rocks that might be sort of evil. Everything from the biggest influence, of course, is Warpstone from the Warhammer Fantasy world, but there's a bit of Kryptonite from Superman. There's the Dragon Shards from Eberron. There's also Tiberium from Command and Conquer. There's so many, and Tiberium is actually a big, very, very big influence for Delirium specifically. Not only just the naming convention. It actually was, I think it was Jill that named Delirium. I think she came up with that name. And so there's the idea of magic rocks coming from a meteor from outer space that have some sort of, or a magical mineral coming from a meteor. I mean, vibranium, right? Like it's not a unique idea at all. And it was meant to be a recognizable one as well.
I will say that I do remember one that you didn't actually mention as an influence, but I guarantee it is I remember early on in the day, in the early days of Drakenheim, before we really established what it was, coming to you and being like, Lovecraft, The Color Out of Space.
Oh yeah, yes, and yeah,
and that definitely also had influence. So I mean, it's very well known, and I think the combination of all of those things also gave us the creepy darkness that surrounds Delirium.
Yeah,
and I also think you took. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you took notes from real world kind of nuclear.
So
elements.
The two things that I studied a lot of were nuclear explosions, and I'm probably saying nuclear wrong, so forgive me, all you everyone that's very uppy about that. I know I don't say it properly, but those kind of physics, but also the physics of real world comets, meteorites, asteroids, and those sorts of things. Like, the real world is filled with examples of actual comets and meteorites that struck the earth and caused things to happen and left behind minerals and other sources like that. And I was very inspired in a lot of ways by uranium as well, and just like like this heavy radioactive element and how radiation behaves. Like radiation in general just has so fascinated fantasy and science fiction writers, and like how it causes mutation and contamination and poisoning and all these sorts of things. So that was a big area of like just being able to read the real world things. And most recently, and this was actually a little bit of a personal disappointment, but there's an annual meteor shower, the Geminids, that happen around this time of year. And me and my partner, her and I, were going to drive out of Toronto to try to go see them. But the night that we planned to do it, clouds and snow.
Oh man. Bummer.
Yeah. But that was something that the real world is so inspiring, and is something to look to more for. Actual nature specifically is something that is so inspiring.
So Benjamin W asks, you use a lot of interesting semi-homebrew creatures in the campaign. Are you planning to include a monster section in the new book, or maybe a way to upgrade existing monster manual entries which have been affected by Delirium? I know you're going to have an answer for this. I don't know if you want me to answer the rudimentary version of this.
Yeah, Kelly, go for it.
So the answer is yes. There is more to it than that, but we will have a monster section. We have a lot of brand new monsters that we have been working on. It was actually a lot of fun because something that a lot of people might not realize is that due to licensing, we have to use monsters. We can only use certain monsters. And some of the ones that we mentioned in season 1 of Drakenheim, we're actually going to have to reinvent ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a lot of fun. So there will be stat blocks for all of those monsters. And we will also be including tools to attach a delirium effect to existing monsters.
By and large, when I run monsters and NPCs, I try to run from the book whenever possible. I do homebrew a lot, but I usually take an existing stat block and modify it, and an existing monster and modify it. So one of the things that Kelly and I are working on are a table of both role-playing traits, descriptive traits, and a couple mechanical features that can be easily bolted on to any monster to easily make it a Drakenheimified Delirium monster instead. And it usually involves things like being able to, like monsters that can interact with the contamination mechanics that we're putting out. So we designed a new system that is kind of a hack of exhaustion that represents the contamination existing within Drakenheim and Delirium. And the reason why we've created this original mechanic is because one of the design ideas with Drakenheim is that contamination is something that has never been encountered in the world before. So the spells that player characters get to deal with it, to deal with things like poison and disease, they don't work on contamination. So you can't cure contamination with lesser restoration. You can't get rid of contamination with dispel magic. You have to find the other ways in the world and with the factions to deal with these problems rather than just look for the solution on your character sheet.
Awesome. Alexander F asks, will the Dragonheim campaign module be available on VTTs?
Or virtual tabletops?
Yeah. My immediate answer is we hope so. And that is a goal of ours, but we're going to see what's possible.
Yeah, we've also gotten a few questions about like what format we're going to distribute the book in. All I can say right now is that we are definitely going to do a hardcover book. A full color hardcover book with the same sort of standard, professional standard that you would expect from most major published RPG products. We're publishing it for 5th edition under the Open Gaming license, and we will have the option to get a PDF copy. And I'm 99% certain that if you buy the hard copy, you'll get the PDF as well. When it comes to VTT support, the thing that we have to be really specific about though is we haven't made inroads yet with any VTT providers, and so we don't know whether that's going to be an integrated thing or not yet. Like, we can't speak with any certainty on that. What I hope for, at least, is that we can give, if you get the book, you get digital copies of the maps that make it easy for you to DIY in a VTT, but the level of like, I know there's really, really comprehensive VTT packages on like services like Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds. If we're going to have that, I don't know yet. There's some research that we have to do before we can promise that.
Yeah. So the goal is a hard yes. That is something we want. We want VTTs. The level at which we will be able to offer that is yet to be determined.
Yeah, and whether or not that will be included, or whether it'll have to be a stretch goal or an add-on or something along those lines, we actually don't know yet. Just so the short answer is yes. The long answer is we got a lot of stuff to figure out to promise that. Yeah.
I think as a blanket statement, while we're going through these questions and all of that, what I will say is that none of the finer details on everything that we're going to be able to offer has been hashed out yet. So our goal is to have as much crazy awesome stuff as possible. What's actually going to be possible, we have yet to see. And
the tricky thing about platforms like Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds, as awesome as they are, those are other people's platforms. So they dictate the rules of how those platforms work, and so we have to make sure that we can abide by their rules as well as their financial model. And that's something that we have a lot of questions about how that actually works. So, well, yes, the feasibility of making something beautiful, yeah, I would love to spend all the time doing that. But I don't know what the rules are around distributing those sorts of things.
Seth V asks, what is the thing you all have enjoyed writing the most for the upcoming book and why? And Monty, I'll let you start with that one as well.
On a personal note, I just feel incredibly privileged to be able to wake up in the morning, make myself a coffee, and go to work writing something that I love. Knowing that, oh, this might pay my rent.
Yes, we can hope. That's the dream.
Yeah, and that people are gonna actually like want to play this. like that, I feel incredibly privileged and lucky, and that is the best part about it. Like the fact that I can put something out into the world that people want to play, that people send us messages like "shut up and take my money," and I'm incredibly flattered by that. A part of me finds it unbelievable that anybody would want to give me any money for anything at all, and so I just feel incredibly privileged and fortunate for that.
The meme of Fry's like handing over the money, yelling "shut up and take my money" has become the most wonderful thing that I've seen on the internet as of late. I know that meme very well, but now when I see it on like the Drakenheim stuff, I'm shocked at the reception we've gotten. But if you had to pick something that we've been working on that you're super excited for people to see, what do you think that would be?
The mutations, like our implementation of wild magic in Drakenheim, the mutations, the contamination effects, the arcane anomalies, all these cool tables that we're whipping up of all the horrible things that can happen to your characters and all the crazy magic that can happen. I'm really proud of like all the game effects surrounding Delirium, and I putting that all together, like that's a part that's like really well developed and like finished. So I'm really excited about that.
My answer to the stuff I've been working on. So first of all, it's been really exciting for me because I always felt connected to Drakenheim, and in the early days, Monty was writing the world and I was just filling it with characters and ideas. But we've gotten to collaborate a lot more recently, and it's been really fun to kind of go over parts of what we saw in season 1 and things that we never saw in season 1 and fill it all with awesome bits and pieces. I will say though, the part that I'm most excited about and the part that I've kind of been headlining. So I've been kind of taking a stab at the players section of the Drakenheim book. And something that I'm really, really excited about is the personal quests that we're designing. The idea here is something that I think is really important, but there's not very much of this in the existing books, is when you are creating a character in the worlds of D&D, it's really important for me to make a character and work with my DM to have plot hooks that are going to come up in the campaign and have my character explore those and be relevant within the world that exists. And so we're designing a personal quest system where the idea is that every character designed for a Dragonheim campaign will have a personal quest that in the players section will have a list of cool personal quests like go get the thing for your family from such and such location, or you're missing a family member in the ruins, or you are an heir to the throne of Drakenheim, or like all sorts of wild things that could be possible. And then what you get to do is take that personal quest, and on the DM side of the book, there's going to be notes about how this fits in to the main plot lines of Drakenheim, so that every player will be important and feel important. And I actually think that system is going to be hopefully really exciting and really amplify what it means to be a character in a Drakenheim campaign.
And when we say system, it sounds really complicated, but it's not much more complicated than the backgrounds in the standard backgrounds. So basically, for a Drakenheim character, in addition to having like your character background, your flaws, your personality traits, your ideals and bonds, you have a personal quest. And that is an objective that may or may not be secret. So it's up to you whether or not your character reveals that to the other players, but the DM will know. And then with each personal quest, there will be a dungeon master side of things that's going to have some twists for you, and how that personal quest factors in to the campaign in a really, really deep way. And no joke, when the campaign begins for a Drakenheim campaign, your characters are in Drakenheim to fulfill their personal quest. That is how the campaign begins. And so it is what's used to kick off the campaign and link you into all the other NPCs and characters. And what we expect is that the personal quest is something that your characters can fulfill about partway through. it's not like the thing that you have to wait until level 20 to finish, because the cool thing about it is that when your character finishes their personal quest, you can either choose an ability score increase or an extra feat. And that's the reward for finishing your personal quest.
Yeah, so that's a very exciting section. And actually, Samuel C. asked a similar question about personal quests. They really like the concept of personal quests that we're going to include. How can you incorporate them in your own games? What are some good example of personal quests? Do they vary on what kind of campaign you are playing? So I know that this personal quest system that we're making is going to be very specific to Drakenheim, but the idea is that you could use similar things to make characters relevant in any campaign. A lot of the personal quests just deal with, I am looking for blank, and it is in the locations specified by the campaign setting. And that, I think, is something that's important, is simply by, I am looking for blank, you fill the blank with something that is relevant to the campaign, exists in the world, and that they have to go to one of the major locations in the campaign to retrieve. What you do on the DM side is you add in a simple, not a simple complication, but a complication that then makes it interesting and weaves it further into the plot.
Yeah, because Drakenheim very much is a place where, and I said this in our original campaign pitch document, people who don't want to risk their lives for something don't come to Drakenheim. Period. There's no such thing as a reluctant hero in Drakenheim. You go there because either you have to, you need to, or you want to. And so I guess, you could be unhappy about the fact that you have to come here, and many characters might be, but you gotta be willing to risk your life for something, because this is a very dangerous place.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of a lot of the stuff that we've been working on. That gives you a bit of insight into some of the things that I think we're hoping to add in that are going to be really exciting to see. Silent Stranger asks, how much of the show is canon to the book? In other words, when we get the amazing campaign book, is it going to be a brand new adventure from the ground up with your choice of faction alliances? Or are certain choices that Drakenforce made going to resonate in the source book at all? What they do from the source book feels difficult to separate out. I feel like they are important NPCs that can't be ignored. I have an answer for this if you want me to go ahead.
Go for it. So
what you saw from Pluto, Veo, and Sebastian will be similar to one of the paths that you can take, but you will notice in season 1 a lot of choices were presented to Drakenforce, and they had to make choices that divided the world of Drakenheim in a certain way. So there will be moments in the campaign that you can count on reliving in your own way. There will be key locations that everybody, no matter what choice you're making, will have to visit to fulfill a Drakenheim campaign. But the path that the players are going to choose to navigate through it, and who they are going to ally with and who are going to be their enemies, is entirely up to the player characters. So the events that you saw in season 1 are not set in stone by any means. The city is something that you will see, and the locations that you saw in season 1 are all there. The NPCs that you saw in season 1 are all there, and they will be portrayed in a similar fashion in the book. But the characters are the wild card, and they always will be. And what we hope to create here is a campaign that every time that you sit down to play it is going to turn out different and new. So even if you've watched season 1, it's not necessarily a spoiler. There might be certain things that are spoiled, but people are going to choose wildly different things, and it's going to end up extremely different.
And to that end, the short answer is that in the context of the book, season 1 is not canon, flat And in fact, in the context of one of the things that we are going to use in the book is that Veo, Sebastian, and Pluto will appear in the book in many of the pieces of artwork. They will have some fun commentary for you, and we will present them as optional NPCs that you can use as rivals, much in the same way that that Jupiter Jones was a rival for our original characters. You could use Drakenforce and the original characters in the same way. However, the campaign will assume that they don't exist. And that you could, for example, if one of your player characters wanted to be the daughter of the steward of Drakenheim who wants to recover the clock tower and get the badge back, you should give that to your player character and take that away from Veo. If one of your player characters wants to be a precocious academy apprentice who caused an incident and who has visions of the meteor and has a strange relationship with his mother, that is something that you should take away from Sebastian and give to one of your player characters. And if one of your player characters wants to be a brash prince from Caspia that might have some strange political motivations, take it away from Pluto and give it to one of your characters. It's more important that your characters are the stars and that they are the primary movers and shakers. And so the way that we've rewritten, especially with the personal quests in the background, you'll actually see that one of the backgrounds is Noble of Caspia. And it kind of is like, oh, you want to take Pluto Jackson's stuff. And that's the way it works. So in fact, we've made more options than just this, but the intent is that you can do this yourself. And one of the things that does mean is that any of those elements of the original three characters that seem really, 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 really connected to the setting and really specific to those characters, we're kind of disentangling them and making them elements of the campaign that you can use.
I'm just double checking. It looks like we may have lost stream for a little bit during that. Everybody's saying it's back.
Okay.
Well, cool.
Okay.
I hope you got the gist of that. That was if you need a recap, Monty, can you give us a summarized couple sentences? I think a few people lost a minute or so.
Okay. The short answer is that the elements that were unique to the original characters are things that your characters will be able to take up instead.
Yeah, something that I've been working on is in the backgrounds. There's going to be a background for Survivor, Hedge Wizard of the Amethyst Academy, and Royalty. What is it? Continental Royalty. Yeah. And those are Veo, Sebastian, and Pluto. So you will have the option of taking a similar background to them and weaving a similar story if you want. But you can also take those backgrounds, choose a different personal quest, and yeah, it might turn out very different. You're going to see nods to everything that Pluto, Sebastian, and Veo did throughout the whole book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, moving on.
Yeah.
Walt Flood asks, you've previously mentioned that you had hidden one of every magic item in the ruins of Drakenheim. Obviously, some of these legendary level items would be inappropriate for lower tier characters to obtain. Were they hidden with gates that would force some degree of level appropriateness in order to obtain?
Yes. So bear in mind, of course, that many of the magic items that are in the core rules are not in the OGL and are not in the SRD, so we actually can't put them in. So there's going to be many omissions, unfortunately. Many of these legendary magic items are now in the hands of the factions. As a very big example, all the faction leaders have been upgraded for the book and are much stronger than they were in the original campaign. And a certain knight captain might now have a holy avenger.
That would have changed things.
Yeah.
No spoilers. But, I mean, I guess it should be stated, if you're watching this, there's probably Drakenheim spoilers. So just be warned about that. So Yeah, and I don't think so. So something that I will say regarding that, don't expect the book to have every magic item in it. There's only specific ones that we're actually putting in that seem appropriate for a campaign setting.
But the legendary magic items will be very hard to get. But they will be there.
Yeah. John C asks, how accessible do you think the Drakenheim book will be for first-time DMs? And would you recommend running a Drakenheim game for a new DM's first long-term campaign?
It will be very accessible for new DMs. I think Kelly and I are making a really big effort to make it very easy to run. I don't know if I would make it my first campaign.
Yeah. What I'll say is there's definitely not a railroad in this campaign setting. So if the idea of a sandbox campaign is daunting to you, then this might not be your first choice. But if you're ready to tackle a sandbox campaign, we are aiming to present a book that is accessible, and we're hoping to learn from what we've seen in some of the other modules that we've read, that maybe you have to flip through pages too much. There's sections that don't have as nice a flow as you would have hoped. We're really hoping to learn from that and hopefully put out something that is easy to run and easy to manage and easy for a DM to understand the flow of the game. If we succeed at that, it should be pretty easy to read from the book and know how to run it.
I think a cool thing that you could do with Drakenheim would be to run Lost Mines of Phandelver as a first-time DM, and then take those characters from Phandelver and have them go to Drakenheim. I think that would work really well, and that's probably what I would recommend to a new DM. And then your player characters will be a little bit tougher and more likely to survive.
Yeah, because I will say that we've put in a lot of systems that are purposely there because, generally speaking, 5th edition has a reputation of being pretty soft and like it's hard to die. But we assure you in Drakenheim, it's actually pretty easy to die. Yeah. If you make the wrong choice, the wrong step, if your players decide for some reason that they want to see what happens if they eat Delirium, it's going to be a bad day for them. So just... yeah, it might be good to have an idea that this is a medium to hard mode campaign.
Yeah, and we might have a couple guidelines in the book of how to make it easier and how to make it harder, depending on how difficult you want the campaign to be.
Michael Epp asks, I'm really looking forward to seeing the Queen of Thieves stats in the upcoming book. Such a great character. My question is, do the players have any chance of defeating her? There's always a chance.
Yeah, there's always a chance. All 5 of the faction leaders will be fully statted. All of them are getting an upgrade. And all of the faction leaders, so the Queen of Thieves, Lucretia Matthias, the Knight Captain Theodore Marshall, the Lord Commander Elias Drexel, as well as the Archmage, one of the Archmages of the Amethyst Academy. Who that is, we haven't actually met the Archmage yet. All of them are challenge rating 15 legendary monsters who have legendary magic items. The only caveat with the faction leaders is they lose their legendary powers if they are allied to the party. So the parties can't rely on an Uber NPC to win their battles for them. How that's going to work will be reasonably done so that it feels like it has justification in the story. But if you're fighting them, they're legendary monsters. If they're fighting with you, they're not.
Yeah, they're still going to be like badass, but they're just badass at the same level that the players are badass, as opposed to a villain to face one-on-one.
And all of them are killable.
Yes.
They're tough. They're some of the hardest bosses in Drakenheim, but all of them are killable, including the Queen of Thieves. Although you can defeat them without killing them. That's another key thing. Yeah.
And that actually we saw in season 1.
Yeah.
But
no joke. The player character, there were several faction leaders that were defeated in season 1 in various ways.
Some of them you might not expect.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Monty, this one's just for you. Thomas K asks, where did you get inspired for the German naming of towns, rivers, places in Westamar?
I've been going to Germany for about a month every summer for the past 5 years, except for this year, of course. I love German history. I love it. I think it's really fascinating. It's really interesting, particularly like the Holy Roman Empire era. It also is part of the roots of the campaign and inspiration from Warhammer Fantasy, which uses a lot of Germanic naming conventions. So that's where it just comes from. Yeah.
And if you speak German, then if you've watched Shadows of Drakenheim, you might be very much amused by our naming scheme, because we have things like the action or the warning forest.
Yes, Ochtenwald, which is just danger forest.
Oh, danger forest. Yes. So yeah, there's a lot. You can learn a lot about the locations if you translate them. But that's just a fun little Easter egg for you. Robert G asks, is it even remotely possible to destroy Drakenheim and the comet from the Silver Order and Sacred Flames point of view?
It is entirely possible to destroy Drakenheim. Yes. Absolutely.
Without giving anything away, what I'll say is, no matter who your players decide to ally with, and no matter who they make enemies of, there is an ending. Mm-hmm. And that includes possible scenarios. Really, which faction is going to win and who is right is entirely up to the player characters. So is it possible to destroy Drakenheim if the players decide that that's the right thing to do? It is definitely possible.
One of the things that is important to know is that I've said this in a couple of our videos before, is that I'm a very big believer in not every problem can be solved with decisive, heroic action. Some problems will require the work of people just collaborating for months and years in order to solve. And some of the big issues in Drakenheim, there's no monster that you can stab in the face and save Drakenheim in one fell swoop. It's a little bit more involved than that, and that's to make the story a little bit more robust, right? There's no one clear go here, kill this thing, and the problem of the world is solved, because that's too easy. It's too convenient.
Yeah. We now move on to specific questions regarding Season 1. So this part definitely will have spoilers for Season 1 of Drakenheim. And if you want to stop watching now because you haven't watched Drakenheim, cool. If not, you have been warned. And we're going to go on with questions regarding Season 1.
Yeah, and for the YouTube recording, I will put a timestamp in the video description for when the spoiler sequence is over, so you can skip ahead.
Awesome. Tiny Talking Tina asks, you're allowed to go back in time and change how your NPCs or characters reacted to one thing that happened in Season 1 of Dungeons of Dragonheim. What do you change?
I have a very strong answer for this one, and it's going to disappoint some people. I would have changed the way the Hooded Lanterns reacted to Lenore.
What would you have done instead?
I came to realize as I've been working on the book that the Hooded Lanterns know that there's no hope for anyone that's been mutated by Delirium. They've been in the city long enough and they've seen it happen to other people before. And when they went, and instead of thinking like there was hope when Lenore was brought back to them, it should have been demoralizing. It should have been something that broke their hearts and made them want to give up. Not something that made them think that there was hope.
That's fair. So I actually was trying to think of an answer for this question. And what's really hard for me about something that I would change as Sebastian is that all of my worst mistakes with that character led to what I argue are the greatest episodes of the whole campaign. And so it's really hard for me to say I want to change something. And I do have an answer. But I want to also talk about the impact that answer has and what we would have lost by me changing this. So to this day, the most disappointing moment in all of Season 1 for me is the stupid cup riddle. Not only is it stupid because I failed at it first, proving how bad I am at puzzles, but then the entire party went on to fail at it. And by all means, that's the dumbest thing we could have ever done. It was such a stupid player moment that, like, I'm going to regret for the rest of my life. But we wouldn't have had the awesome prison escape, the epic fight with Big Linda, the bowing to the queen. These are all spoilers. But none of that would have occurred if we hadn't have messed up so bad. So at the same time, I love what came from that horrible mistake. And those are some of my favorite episodes. The prison escape, I loved us having to fend for ourselves. So although that is the one thing I would change, the implications of changing something in what I deem are some great moments in the campaign, I don't know if I would actually change anything.
Alex wants to know, what, is anything, is happening between your players and or the DM behind the scenes? I've noticed that when you guys are playing, that Kelly, Jill, and Joe are always so good at working together to keep the plot moving forward and developing cool ideas of what to do next. This happens sometimes with my players, but not nearly as often as it does with you guys. Does it all come from your experiences playing RPGs, DM discretion, or do you have discussions away from the table as to what you are hoping to do next? I think it's all of the above.
It is a little bit of all of the above. I will say that me, Joe, and Jill have our own text message conversation away from Monty, and then we also have a group chat with Monty. So Monty will ask us before every session if we ended off at like a cliffhanger, not a cliffhanger, but like you can go to this town, or this town, or you can go to this location. Here's a bunch of quests. You need to pick what you're going to do. Yes, before we sit down for the next game, we have told Monty which of the actions we're going to be going on. We don't need any details about it. We just kind of need to know what direction we're going to push the story in. In the private chat, I will often be texting with Joe and Jill right before we go live, up to an hour or so before. We'll just text and be like, what's the vibe tonight? What's our current mission? What are we working on? How's everybody's character? What mood are our characters in? And that just helps us get prepped and ready mentally for the direction that we're going to push things that night. Again, we don't make big plans. You can see us struggle with making plans on the air. So we'll have a loose idea. And that will be kind of what we use to push forward.
I think one of the things that is also a lesson from streaming games, there's two things to know just about our group. First of all, we've been playing together for a really long time. We have a lot of trust between each other, and all of us are interested and committed into making the best possible story. And so, and also, because we're friends who trust each other and have known each other for a long time, we can pick up on each other's cues. So one of the things that people bring up is about improv, right? And people bring up this idea of yes and that comes up as a piece of DM advice, but that's actually advice for the entire group. Everyone in our group is always building on each other and supporting each other's ideas and embracing each other's ideas. Even when we disagree and are trying to decide what to do next, everyone is committed to this idea of moving the story forward. And it's not, I hesitate to use the word story. It's about moving the action, moving the narrative forward, creating an interesting circumstance. And it's kind of like jazz, right? It's kind of like jazz music. Like everyone's jamming together and figuring out how's it all going, right?
Great analogy. And yeah, that is something. Is you're going to notice that all four of us, when we're at the table, we really okay. It's funny because I've played at a table that isn't Drakenheim, and yeah, we get into arguments and discussions about one person wants to do this, one person wants to do this. And I actually remember at the very beginning of Dragonheim saying that one thing we need to keep in mind is we're playing D&D, but this is also a show that we're going to be streaming. So we don't want silly arguments, even though they do come up. But when they come up, I feel like it's during really intense decisions that are super important to the campaign. And that way the arguments are part of the narrative. They're in character. But I don't want silly arguments at the table about, well, I think we should sneak in. I think we should go in guns blazing. And then we get into this big argument at the table. Instead, I just want all of us, somebody's got to give. So there's always somebody that goes, let's just go ahead and do it. And it works.
It's very much a mindset thing that you learn I feel like we've learned it really well from streaming. And I think that it's one of the biggest lessons that games that aren't streamed can learn from streaming games, because a lot of players that not to disparage players, but many D&D players are actually quite selfish and to some extent want the story to be about them and want their decisions to take priority. And even though they're affable with the other people at the table, it's kind of like this, everyone wants to be the main character and doesn't want to share that spotlight. But learning how to share the spotlight and work together collaboratively to operate like a band that is working together is something that you learn when you're streaming D&D, but not something that you learn when you're just playing D&D. It's tricky.
Yeah, that's been the biggest lesson, I would say. Goblin asks, by the way, nice name, Goblin. It's really simple and straightforward. In my game, my players make choices that dramatically shift the story. I feel like manipulating the Rat Prince was one such choice. How much would the story have differed if Drakenforce had killed him instead? Probably a lot.
Would have been harder to get through the sewers.
Yeah.
So that would have been different, first of all. So there goes like the entire through line of the first 10 episodes.
Yeah. I think that, though, if we had killed the Rat Prince, the rats would have still been an issue, just maybe not as big of an issue. They would have been. So, okay, imagine, if you will, there's a scenario out there where instead of the Rat Prince, we kill the Rat Prince right away, and then we end up coming up with some scheme involving the gnolls. And suddenly the rats end up in the position that the gnolls were in, and the gnolls end up being more like the rats. It's kind of this thing that, like, we chose the Rat Prince as an NPC that we latched onto, and Monty ran with it. We could have latched onto a different monster group and made a very different pathway.
At the same time, the Rat Prince was integral to defeating the Queen of Thieves.
In a manner of speaking, it was
a disaster, but like how that would have gone down later on in the campaign, I'm not sure. I really wonder how you guys would have dealt with that situation later on, right?
I mean, in retrospect, Operation Mayhem wasn't the most well thought out operation, but it did what it did. Mm-hmm. It had its benefits. It got rid of her.
Yeah.
Allison Bob, spoilers for season 1. To what extent did the players' interactions with the NPCs affect the course of the campaign? For example, were you considering Queen Lenore to be savable when you designed her? I feel like you may have answered that with your big change. Or was it another instance of the Rat Prince syndrome? You saw her as just a boss monster, and had Kelly not taken out the mirror, she'd most likely be dead. Maybe you can name some other examples of unexpected NPC transformations from season 1. I got 3, and you might have more.
Okay, what are your 3?
The Rat Prince, Lenore, and Oscar Yorn.
Yeah.
The 3 NPCs that you did not intend to be what they were.
Oh, yeah, and they became really important characters in so many ways. I think other like minor characters that I'm just glad became as significant and important as they are. Blackjack Mel kind of became a bigger character, and I love that. And yeah, I think those are the big evolutions of characters that really changed in a pretty profound way. I think that in a lot of ways, I was discovering Elias Drexel as I was role-playing him and what he was all about. I was really trying to figure out who he was. I was really... I got a better sense of who who Lucretia Mathias was as I role-played that character more. And all the NPCs, I feel like I got to know them better through role playing them, and that was a lot of fun. But yeah, those 3 were the biggest unexpected transformations, because those were 3 characters that I thought, oh yeah, these characters could die, and I was prepared for them to just die. That was what I was expecting, but then they didn't, and so they went on to become a bigger part of the campaign. Now we could ask that question: who are the other characters in the campaign that died that could have been bigger characters than they were? Because that's the whole thing. Like because there's many people like there or that could have been interacted with more. You guys in season 1, you guys never went to visit the Duchess. And now we're seeing the Duchess in season. What would have happened had you decided to go visit the Duchess in season 1? Yeah. Right?
I mean, there's always the 4 turtles at the beginning that was just a hook that never was picked up on.
Yeah, but that was I'm not to break any hearts, but that was kind of an Easter egg. But I mean, had you guys I was like throwing that one out there, but had you guys picked up on it, I would have pursued it, and it could have been something interesting, right?
There was an early concept that there was just going to be 4 monk turtles hanging out in the sewers that worked with the ratlings, and they had one of the rats, but like that never got picked up on, so it got dropped very early on.
Yeah. And like, you know, what would have happened had you all worked with the falling fire a little bit more closely, right?
Someone just brought up oh man, the potion shop of horrors, the little mud creature.
There's so many things, there's so many like NPCs and places that you didn't go that you could have gone, decisions that you could have made. I mean, straight up, you want to know how the player characters could have influenced things? In the cathedral, there was a point blank choice asked to Veo, which faction do you want to work with? She could have made a different choice, and that would have profoundly changed the campaign.
Yeah. Saxy Pirate asks, for me, do you have a backup character ready along those same lines? If somehow the Dusk Warden's total party kill, Monty, do you have plans for campaign 3? So I'll start with answering. I have a few ideas for backup characters fleshed out. I would be really sad though, because I have a lot of stuff planned for my current character, and I'm really excited to explore his backstory a little bit further. But I do have a few ideas. What's hard for me is I make about 30 characters and never know what I'm going to pick. I'm kind of sold that I need to play a bard at some point, and I also need to play a paladin at some point. Those are the 2 I think sticking out to me the most. But whether we will see them is yet to be determined. Monty, what happens if a total party kill occurs?
Interesting that the assumption is that a total party kill would mean we go on to season 3. I don't think a total party kill would be the end of Shadows of Drakenheim. But I might know something that other people don't.
I think in general, something that's important, and I want to address this, that a lot of people are worried about total party kills. And I mean, there also have been episodes where it could have happened. And if you're one of those people who's like, Monty's too soft, I guarantee that there are definitely episodes that I am afraid for in my character's life. Actually, a lot recently in Shadows of Drakenheim. And in Dungeons, towards the end of the campaign, it got a little dicey there as well.
Yeah.
But I was just going to finish off by saying, I don't think that you're ever aiming for a total party kill, because we're presenting a show. Mm-hmm. And so one of the characters dying is an interesting plot point. All of the characters dying is kind of an abrupt brick wall in the narrative that you then have to hurdle over. So you saw an instance of a total party kill in the failed puzzle. The repercussions in season 1 of the failed puzzle were that Monty took everything away from us.
Yeah.
And so that, in essence, is a total party kill. It was a total failure, and we had to deal with the repercussions, which made it more interesting story-wise, but still felt like a huge hindrance because of our poor decisions.
Like, ultimately, and I've caught some flack for this, but like, ultimately, I will look for the way to avoid the total party kill, but still defeat the party, right? And generally speaking, even in some of the close calls that we've had in this campaign, I'm more inclined to, call it bailing them out. But honestly, I've worked hard on this campaign, and yes, I have a little bit more of a narrative focus on this whole thing. And so I want to see where these stories go. And I don't necessarily just want it to be over because they all died, right? So I want to know what's going to happen. And to me, them all dying is not really the most interesting way it can end. And so it is a balance in a Dungeons and Dragons game between the narrative and the threat and the game. And those things all exist in balance. And sometimes, the threat of defeat is not death. And I always find that defeat and losing is way more interesting than just killing the entire party. Not to say that I would never do it, but I'm going to do I'm going to do what's most interesting.
Yeah, there are episodes that I'm sure I was an inch away from death, and I know I was, and you wouldn't have held back. But I think, it's the difference between like if one of us makes a bad decision versus if we're in a situation where we can be captured, why not go with the capture? If we're in a situation where we can be punished, go with the punishment. Mm-hmm. But that's actually just something I take into DMing in general. My players worked very hard on their characters. We're trying to explore stories. I think total party kills suck for the players and for me as a DM. Mm-hmm. I'm telling a story too, and they're my main characters. I like them.
Yeah, one of the things though that I would never do at this stage is give any of my NPCs to the player characters to play. I probably would not do that. I would almost certainly make them make a new character or do something creative. But it's not like there's ever going to be a situation where River is going to be played by a player. River's not an adventurer. She's a scientist and a communications expert. She doesn't work in the field.
Leviathan guy asks, so we know which factions Veo, Sebastian, and Pluto sided with, but based on their ideals and beliefs alone, which factions would you two side with and why? I actually love this question.
I hesitate to answer this question because it reveals my biases of which faction. Like, I don't want it to be read as like, oh, Monty likes this faction the best. And I have very deliberately tried to design the factions so that I can't answer that question. Because I have always felt that if I could answer that question, then that means that I'm showing too much favoritism to one of the factions. And for me, as the author of these factions, my modus operandi has been all the factions are telling the truth and all the factions are right. Like, I try to make it that, like, no, I agree with this faction. Like, they have the right idea. And for me as the creator of the factions, that helps me role play them. That helps me play them in a more inclusive way. And that helps me like get behind them, because sometimes I have like I kind of love the Amethyst Academy. Like I do, like they're definitely one of the most well-developed of the factions. And at the outset, I definitely would have answered, oh yeah, the Amethyst Academy is the one I totally agree with, because I love wizards. And I've really worked hard to make the other factions have compelling reasons to side with them that I would agree with in order to roleplay it better.
Well, that is a good answer, and that makes a lot of sense. My answer is much more straightforward. I've been thinking about this a little bit. My original answer was going to be the Amethyst Academy, but that's more so Kelly as a D&D player, because I love spellcasters. Kelly as a person would probably actually end up in the Hooded Lanterns, even though they're not necessarily my favorite faction. The idea of a group of people who are trying really hard to fix a broken thing, something that meant something to them. And I think that speaks a lot to me is like, I don't know, if my hometown or the place that I lived, if there was a chance for me to do something to like search for the people I cared about and help out and try to rebuild, I think that is the direction that I as a person would lean towards, is like wanting to fix things. Whereas some of the other groups have what I actually argue is probably a better view, which is it's unsavable. Let's move on to something different. But I'm kind of a stickler to be stuck in the past. And I think I would fight to reclaim what was lost. Yeah. And that's what the Hooded Lanterns are all about.
Yeah. Walt wants to know if Alder the Immense is going to make an appearance in Shadows of Drakenheim. All I can say is yes, hopefully soon.
We have a question from Dun Y, who asks, now with the widespread awareness of VTTs and the beautiful maps you can easily put on screen for us viewers, are you planning to go back to minis when you return in person? Are you considering sticking with VTT mapping even when it's no longer remote? With our support, would you be willing to get a better system of cameras to shoot more clearly the action on the table? When it is an option to, I think we are both excited to go back to the tabletop, because we do. I personally think that that's something that our show had going for it, is that it was just a group of friends around a table. Plus, I love Dwarven Forge, but we are looking at ways to improve it.
Yeah.
And Monty, I'll let you talk a little bit about anything else that you have.
We're putting together a budget. We've been... yes, we have had some amazing and generous support from our patrons, and we have been kind of banking, saving up so that we can do something special for when we come back. All I can say right now, pardon me, is that the first thing that we're looking at are better microphones. Probably either we're going to get like a wireless headset for everybody, or a wireless lav, or something that isn't in our faces, so we can more easily reach the table. I've been talking with a lot of folks about what we can do for that. And yes, the real answer though actually is, it's not about a better camera setup. It's actually about having somebody who is operating the camera as their only job. Right now, Kyle is responsible for operating the stream and chat and the cameras. And really, to do it well, you have to have a person whose entire job is running the camera. So that might, and that is an expense. That is somebody that has to be paid. And so that's something that we might investigate in the future, because it's actually not a matter of mounting a camera on an arm or mounting a camera on an anything. It's about having an actual person running the camera.
Yeah, that way, because right now, like before we went to VTTs, what you guys were seeing is we would set up the camera before a battle was about to take place. But then mid-battle, if we moved or changed locations, basically Kyle would be running everything, have to like switch cameras, go over, move one of the cameras, go back, switch back to it. And it became kind of clustered. But if we have somebody who can easily just move the camera to where the action is, we're going to get much better visuals on everything going on.
Yeah, and you need somebody on the computer deciding which camera is active, and it is a two-person job. You need the person running the stream and the person running the cameras. It's really hard for that job to be done by two people, and unfortunately sometimes it's super boring as well. So hopefully when we're all back in person, we can have Kyle and maybe another cool person helping us out with that stuff.
Yeah. Moving on to, we had a lot of questions about magic items. I know that it's 7:14, and I want to make sure that we get to some of our questions from the chat. So I'm going to try to have precise answers to as many of these as I can. So Rich McCann asks, when choosing magic items for this campaign, did you pick for the characters or what fits thematically? I wondered because at one of the points in the campaign, there's the Rod of the Pact Keeper, which none of the PCs could use.
Yeah, I think you do what makes sense for the world and what makes sense for the characters. That's just me. Like sometimes it makes sense for this character to have this item. Yeah, that's how it goes.
Generally, I think, it's a little bit of both. Like, you want to pepper in magic items that you know your players are going to want because of the characters they're playing. But then you also pepper in magic items that speak to the whole world. And I think that's important. Like, certain NPCs might have a magic item that the players might not use, but it makes sense for them to have it.
Mm-hmm.
Isaac Reminen asks, you seem to give out a lot of homebrew magic items and potions. What parameters do you have for deciding if you should give it to your players? Also, do you normally do that in other game settings? Because obviously the Meteor's Delirium begs for that to happen in Drakenheim.
Oh yeah, I do it all the time. And when in doubt, I give out consumable items because players either never use consumable items, so they don't exist, or then they do use them and then they're gone.
Yeah. I hope I pronounced this right. Su Chan Peng asks, Monty, Rudy releasing the Fire Elemental in the penultimate Shadows of Drakenheim fight, spoilers, and her new magic axe's ability to grant her temp HP fighting minions gave me the impression that magic items were given a bit too freely. Do you see the risk of the Monty Hall effect, pun intended, affecting future Shadows of Dragonheim episodes? And how would you go about fixing any Monty Hall situations?
Well, first of all, the Fire Elemental gem was a consumable item, so that's gone now. That's been used. Right? So that's a clear example actually of the last question of it fixing itself, because that item was a consumable item. It was used to get the party out of a bind, which is exactly what a consumable item is supposed to do. And now it's a non-issue. So that's actually these questions actually relate to each other. It's like, yeah, you just have to make sure that if you've given the party a bunch of consumable items, like make sure that they've got like 2 or 3 in their back pocket and wait till they've used them to give them more. That's all.
Good answer. Martin Hall asks, in both Dungeons of Drakenheim and Shadows of Drakenheim, you provide healing potions quite freely. This seems to make a quite different balance in the game, so that healing spells and other healing have much less value. Is this a design decision for the shows, a way to match the player choices, or a general playstyle choice for your group?
Our party doesn't have a healer.
That is really it. Is, as a DM, I think it's important, if your party doesn't have a healer, don't punish them. Like, let everybody play what they want. It just so happens that nobody in our party had an interest in any of the major healers. So you make magic healing potions and scrolls or a magic item that can help them part of it, so that they do have an option to let healing exist. The fact that potions are still in action means that we have a few kicking around. We can take them if we're out of battle, but we still have to survive the combat encounters and hopefully have enough to keep us going.
As long as using a potion requires an action, it's not a problem. Like that, having to drink a potion as an action is a huge cost in the middle of battle. And potion, and like that might not save you. That like if your party doesn't have a healer, you can give out a lot of potions, but just don't let them drink potions as bonus actions. That's when you run into a problem. But when potions require an action to drink, that's fine. In my experience, I see no problem with it. I am completely content with the difficulty of my campaign. I don't think that I am going easy on my players. Maybe people disagree with me on that. I don't. And I don't think the players feel that way either.
I think there's actually another important thing that needs to be part of this question as well. And that is that we have things like the haze, which affect our ability to take rests. Yeah. So the amount of potions that we have also needs to be compared to how long our party manages to go without actually getting a long rest. So I would say in a regular adventure, like an arc of our story, especially in Shadows of Drakenheim, I blow through my potions and then I still have the last little bit where I'm like, guys, I'm out of potions. I'm out of all of my stuff. And then we have to deal with it. So at no point have I found that I've had an abundance of health potions.
Mm-hmm.
I found that I've had 2, and by the time we get back to a home base, my character is at like 3 hit points and I don't have any potions left. So I think that that's also important, is that we go quite a while without taking rests in our campaigns because of the environment.
Yeah. And overall, like, I'm not worried about the balance of healing in my campaign because no one's playing a healer, and so it doesn't make their abilities redundant. Like, there's no abstract game balance concept. Like, the only balance that matters in Dungeons and Dragons is, does the dungeon master have a balanced workload? Right? Like, that's the only point where game balance matters. Like, the game needs to be manageable for the dungeon master, and that's why it needs to be balanced, is so that it's manageable for a DM. But and it also, the only other area where it needs to be balanced is that the players need to feel like each of them can contribute in an equal and meaningful way. As long as those two things are balanced, you don't need to worry about game balance. Balance between the players and their spotlight time and capabilities, balance of the DM's workload. That is what game balance means in the context of a role-playing game. This is not a MOBA or an MMORPG where you have to balance some sort of abstract PvP, like, weird, like, economy thing. That doesn't exist in D&D. It's not a thing. Like, we don't have to think about it in terms of the way we think about balance in a video game way.
Gregory Nash asks, do you guys ever give out the bag of tricks in your D&D campaigns? And the specific question, how many animals you can control with a single bonus action, and how many bonus actions you need to use? Apparently there's nothing online for this. We have given out the bag of tricks.
Yeah.
Joe loves the bag of tricks. It's why we actually gave it to him, because out of everybody at the table, Joe has the most fun with random magic items that make weird things happen. He has a blast with them. How many animals would you have let him control at once? I
think you can control them all with the bonus action. I'm not worried about it. I mean, we've given it out. It's an awesome item. I think you can command them all. I'll have to look that up.
It's weird. Joe never used more than one, but
yeah. So we're coming into general questions about DMing now. So here's what I think is, we'll open it up to chat, and we've got a handful of questions from our patrons, and maybe we'll take like a patron question and a chat question from here on out.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. So let's start opening up questions. I'm going to get a little notepad over here and start saving some questions for you guys. And Monty, while I'm doing that, if you want to, the patron questions.
If a person, Stephen J asks, if a person wants to change characters mid-campaign, would you prefer the character died rather than having them retire or leave? My answer is simple. If a player doesn't want to play a character anymore, you shouldn't force them to play that character. That's just, like, your friends want to have fun. You want your friends to have fun. If a player is sick of a character, just let them do it. It's fine. If a player really abused this and was like cycling out characters every other session, then I'd have a chat with them and be like, come on, man, what's going on? Right? But like, otherwise, no. That's if they want to retire, you figure it out. Right? If it was going to happen in our show, I would probably take it really carefully, but it hasn't happened in our show.
Yeah. Question from our chat here. Will you use your own 3D print for your encounter settings? Will you consider to make them or other pre-printed into digital images, for instance, to use in your book of Drakenheim?
Oh, I'm 3D printing a ton of stuff to use when we come back in person. I have so many cool things that I'm 3D printing now that I can't wait to use. But the images in the book will be art. They will not be photos.
I'm going to do one more from the chat here because we're getting a few rolling in. For Monty, primarily, going all the way back to pre-session 1 of Dungeons, other than the map and the PCs, how much did you actually have 100% ready in terms of references, prepped encounters, etc.? And how much did you prep week to week in response to what happened?
Oh man, I had a lot prepared, and I also had to do a lot every session. So I would say like my pre-campaign prep was like several months of work getting prepared. And basically, when we're going to run Drakenheim, the campaign starts at 6 p.m. And the way that it works for me now is I get up in the morning and I spend all day getting ready for the game. Now that's the way that it works. So that's how much prep goes into a game, like at least all day, and sometimes all day Monday as well, at least.
Wow. Let's move on to a patron specific question. We have one here from Stan.
And I will just say that is an inhuman amount of campaign prep, and that is not a standard that a regular DM should be ever held to. Never.
No.
Never.
Again, we're putting on a show, so the work goes in to make sure that it's going to flow and make sense. Your campaign can have, like, our campaign had plot holes.
Yeah.
Yours can have way bigger plot holes because it doesn't matter as much. Yeah. We're trying to keep a story flowing, which requires a bit more work, and I appreciate that.
And a lot of my prep is in being prepared to improvise. Like, I do prep so that when my players do something I'm not expecting, I know enough about the world that I can respond.
Stainsby Kingsby asks, with my players going off the path or what I have planned, how far ahead should I plan? I'm currently running a homebrew world, and we previously ran a few session zeros, which link into the campaign. I'm taking it 1 or 2 sessions at a time, but I have an ultimate ending that I want to reach. So how far ahead should somebody plan?
It's hard. I mean, it's really hard to give up the ultimate ending, and maybe you can pull it off. But be prepared for your players to do something that's gonna not... You know, the more you have invested in the ultimate ending that you want, the harder it is to give it up when your players don't want the story to go in that direction.
I think when planning ahead, something that I do is I have a loose concept of everything that I want to happen in the current. So I have a very loose concept of the campaign story as a whole. Mm-hmm. I have, like, here's the plot, the general plot. I have a tighter idea of the arc that we are on, where I want that arc to go, who the major players in that arc are, how it's going to connect to the elusive other stuff. And then for the night, I have an even finer tuned example of what I want to happen. But the key is that I never plan solutions. I plan problems.
Yes, and that's exactly it. If you're planning problems, it's up to the players to solve them.
Yeah.
If you've decided how the problem must be solved as a dungeon master, back that car up. It's not your job to solve the problem. It's the player's job to solve the problem. Back up, open your mind up, and start thinking of how is the problem being caused? What is your villain's action plan? How is you want to think about, how is my villain going to win? And then it's up to your players to stop that from happening.
Question from chat. Was Pluto unable to communicate with the Flame Tongue when Matthias turned it radiant, or did he just choose to stop that interaction? I feel like there was something with
yeah, that we might come back to that one. I'm gonna hold on to that.
Cool. Another one from chat then, and the reason why we're holding on to that is we might yet see Pluto and Ignatius again. Would you ever consider having a PC in your campaign betray the others? I honestly thought Pluto was set up to do that, like many others, most likely.
I would. Should you? That depends on your players.
I tend to allow it if it feels narratively like the right thing for the whole party. If it comes out of nowhere, and I actually had a player try to plan something terrible that involved him turning on and killing the entire party, and I didn't necessarily like that. What's more interesting to me is not plots that go against each other directly, but more there, and actually going back to the personal quests. The personal quests in Drakenheim might conflict with each other. And this is where the players are going to have to decide how to interact with one another's goals and aspirations. And you see this in Dragonite. You see Pluto, Veo, and Sebastian negotiate what they all want and come to terms with what they can achieve together. And it was a choice of theirs to work together for what they could do together, rather than some people had to give up their goals a little bit. Some people had to change their goals a little bit. And that's going to be part of Drakenheim campaign.
I think, though, with my group specifically, like Kelly, you and Jill and Joe, I could go to any one of you and be like, let's betray the other ones. And it would be amazing and it would work. But that's because I know us, and I know that we could do that and it would be okay. But but that doesn't mean that I've run other groups of players that would not be capable of doing it. So if you want that to happen in your campaign, you have to ask yourself, is this a group that's capable of doing it? For me, the answer is yes. My group is capable of doing this. But I've run D&D with other groups, like even the boys game. No. I would like our old Sunday night game never would have worked.
No, it would have gotten too messy.
Yeah.
Andrew S. asks from the patron questions, in relation to running, designing a game, I have so many good ideas for my campaign, but I don't know how to properly implement them without knowing how the game will go. How do I know when the time is right to use the plot point I've pre-realized? Tough question.
Again, it comes into don't prepare a plot. Don't prepare a story. Don't prepare a narrative. Prepare a problem. Make a villain with a plan. And a problem that needs to be solved. You're creating a situation, a scenario, not a story. If you create a scenario that has many different ways of being solved, you will actually know. You could always go back to the scenario and be like, okay, so the scenario is an earthquake just happened underwater and there's a giant tidal wave heading towards the biggest city in the world. It's going to hit in 3 days. Well, now you know what's in that city. You know what's going to happen. Like, that's it. You just take it from there.
Yeah, and I find it's just a series of problem after problem. This kind of relates to what I said earlier, but like I have a big problem for the campaign. Like if you're writing a campaign, you have the big problem. And then you just break it up into smaller problems. Yeah. And you direct your players from one problem to the next.
And you just light the world on fire. So the tidal wave's coming for the city, but the problem is that in the city is an ancient cathedral that is binding the soul of all evil. So when the tidal wave hits the city, the cathedral will be destroyed and the soul of all evil will be released. But in order to move the binding stone of the soul of all evil, you have to get the artifact of MacGuffinhood that is in the possession of the Prince of Candive, that he hates the city and would love to see. Like, so you just make a mess of problems. And then at that point, here you go, players. Figure it out.
And then they have to untangle your mess. And you basically, at that point, you just give them the plot points as the players instigate going to them. What you're really trying to do at the end of the day is plant a series of hooks that lead from one problem to the next. So if they show up in the city and they're like, oh, cool, we're here for the ceremony of the stone that keeps all evil, but we just found out there's a tidal wave coming. Now we have to go deal with the prince, but it turns out he hates the city. So as they go through these steps, they start to learn more and more about the problems. And now we just wrote a campaign apparently about a city and a tidal wave. So
yeah,
season 7.
Yeah.
Let's take another one from chat. What do I got here? Uh, will the Queen of Thieves cup riddle be in the book?
Yes, I think so.
Cool. Will Shadows of Drakenheim also be in the new book, or will that be a later release?
There will be certain elements that of Shadows, but the whole book is about the city. So the book that we're making is about Dungeons of Drakenheim, and the conceit of the book is that your players don't leave the city or like Emberwood Village, right? If your players have gone more than a day away from Drakenheim, something has gone wrong. Really, really wrong.
The book might include little bits of information that allude to some of the plot that you've seen in Shadows of Drakenheim. Because when we initially created Shadows of Drakenheim, the goal was that it was a campaign meant to show what was happening in the larger world revolving around Drakenheim. But because we're making a book about Drakenheim, we need to answer some of the bigger questions in that book as well, which is what season 2 is meant to do. So you will see hints and nods to events in season 2, but the story and plot is that of what occurred in season 1.
Yep.
Let's see. Claven K asks, how would you go about doing a world where the magic is broken, still usable? And is there anything you would do in addition to this so that casters aren't handicapped?
I would not change anything from a player perspective. Nothing. I would do that entirely from the world building and the tone of the world. I would probably say that fewer people are being born with magic. There are people who lost their powers, and so but the player characters are, everything is fine with them. I might have more areas of dead magic and more areas of anti-magic. What about you, Kelly? What would you do?
I do agree with that I think something that's important is if I'm really excited to play a sorcerer or wizard and I sit down at a person's table and they say magic is broken and it's not going to work normally, then I'm like, well, why don't I play something else then? And that kind of sucks. So I do think that it's important to not limit your players. Remember that the player characters are the exception to the rule. Mm-hmm. If you're in a world where mages are killed on sight, well, you got to let your players who want to play a spellcaster get away with it somehow. And that's an important thing to answer is how do they get away with it? But I do think that using things like wild magic and anti-magic can be really fun for certain locations.
There's also the Unraveling Magic zone from Tasha's Cauldron, which is really cool too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Another question from chat. Let's see. Will it be possible for an adventuring party to make enemies of each of the five factions and pursue their own agenda, create their own faction?
I think that if you make enemies of all 5 factions, you're probably going to die.
I could see it working, but you're playing hard mode.
Yeah.
You're playing hard mode. If you turn against all the factions and decide that the Rattlings are the faction you're going to get behind, well, you're going to be eating Delirium and you're going to be mutating and you're going to probably lose your mind in the process if you want to follow the Rattlings all the way. So you're going to have to ally with somebody. There's no way that a group of 3 to 10 people are going to change all of Drakenheim by themselves.
But also, like, there's some factions that it's actually really hard to get them to be your enemy, but then if you make them your enemy, it's really bad.
Yeah, the factions are all designed. So you guys saw what happened when we made enemies of certain factions. What you have no idea about is what happens if the Hooded Lanterns or the Amethyst Academy decide they want to kill the party, and it's probably going to be a bad time. Yeah. They're all bad times, but if you have all of them against you, it's a really bad. They might team up with each other to kill you if you're against all of them.
Yeah. So again, a lot of these things are guidelines, and so my hope is that the book will give you a toolbox to figure out how, without necessarily, like, I'm not going to write in the book, this is what happens if the players make enemies of all 5 factions. But you're going to have all the tools that you need to determine what happens based on, they're enemies with all the factions. So this is what happens.
I have a question here from a patron, Jake, and I actually have a pretty quick answer because I'm pretty sure you and I just wrote this episode, or are planning to write this episode. It's in the works, but
yeah.
I'm curious. Jake asks, I'm curious what tips you had for large group play. We have 7+ DM. I also wouldn't mind if you made this its own episode. We plan to make it our own episode. How to run for small groups, how to run for big groups. This is a question that comes up a lot. Mm-hmm. One thing that I think is important, just to answer the question a little bit, is I think that if you are setting up for a larger group, you need to let go of certain elements of Dungeons and Dragons that a lot of people might have been hoping for. If you want high theatrical value, if you want heavy investment from all your players, it's more likely you're going to get that in a smaller group. When you move to a bigger group, you can expect a little bit more chatter at the table, a little bit more, we're just here to play some D&D, wacky, zany things are going to occur, and there's going to be less focus at the table. This isn't necessarily a horrible thing. It can be a lot of fun for a group of friends to get together, have some snacks, drink some beers, roll some dice, and have a great time. But the larger your group is, the more it's a bunch of friends hanging out with D&D happening than it is a dedicated D&D game. I find that the smaller the group you get, the more people can be like, I'm going to get lost in my character and disappear. Yeah. It can happen in large groups, but it's harder.
Yeah, there's no magic silver bullet that makes a large group function more. Like, you can't get around the fact that there's 8 people. Here's the thing, like, a lot of people say, well, keep everybody on time. But again, remember, if you have a group of 7 players and a dungeon master, divide 1 hour by 8 people. Now have a group with 3 players and a dungeon master. You're dividing an hour by 4. You can't get around that math. There's no way of avoiding the fact that with a group of 8 people, everyone is watching more than they are playing. And there's no way to solve that problem. That's just the way it works.
Yeah, and one thing that you need to note is you should broadcast this to your players. If you are setting up to play a table with 8 people, broadcast it to your players. Be like, hey guys, let's make sure to be quick on our turns. Try to share the spotlight. There's going to be more time between turns. Try to stay as engaged as possible. You're going to be doing your best. I've ran tables of 8 and I've had nights where it worked incredibly and was so much fun. I've also had nights where I left feeling absolutely exhausted and drained because nobody could get their head into the game. Yeah. And it took 40 minutes for a player to take their turn or to get to their turn. And these are just things that can happen. And the larger the group, the more these things are going to happen.
Yeah. And as you cross a threshold point where you have to decide, like, is this it? I will also say, and not to be cynical, but I often find that with large groups, at least the large groups that I have been part of. So again, I'm just talking about my personal experience. I'm not saying that this is indicative of everybody. But generally speaking, with every group that I've had that has been more than 4 or 5 players, usually 6 to 8 is the threshold point where at least one of those players is there to just be part of the social event. And they actually don't care about playing D&D so much as they just want to hang out with everybody. And that is something to take note of, because I have been part of groups where it turned out that there wasn't 1 or 2 people that were like that. It turned out that there were 4 people in the group, that they just wanted to hang out and have fun with their friends. They didn't really care that we were playing Dungeons and Dragons. And that bothered me. And so I want to play D&D with people who want to play D&D. And maybe I want to just do different things with my friends that don't want to hang out, but don't necessarily want to play D&D. So it's a tough question to ask, because you want to hang out with your friends, especially now that we haven't seen all of our friends in forever. But there's a lot of really good board games that are just sizzle with big groups. You know what I mean? And so sometimes it's like, ask yourself the question, should this be board game night or should it be D&D night?
Got a question here from Trolls, who asks, for me, do you think that Monty's amazing voice acting for the Rat Prince steered the party to work with the prince instead of killing him? The answer is 100% yes. I've gone on record saying this before, and I'm not blaming the fans. But not only were we enamored with the Rat Prince, but when I went online and there was all these people constantly saying, if the Rat Prince dies, we riot. And I was able to easily get behind that. I'm a fan of the show too. This is what's really interesting is, yes, I'm working on the Drakenheim book. Yes, Monty is DMing the campaign, which means that there are still parts that are a mystery to me. I get to work. I know a little bit, but there are parts that are a mystery to me. So every time that I sit down to play, I'm excited to see what happens next. So I definitely felt like the three of us were on the bandwagon already with Monty's amazing voice acting, having such a quirky and lovable character, but then also seeing the fans' response to the Rat Prince made us jump on it even more. And we were like, well, why would we? Let's go find the Rat Prince. And we started trying to find excuses to work with the Rat Prince so that we could have more of him. And it just got a little crazy.
Yeah. I had fun playing the Rat Prince.
It was fun for all of us. So it was kind of an accidental, but like you can see why it happened. I think.
Also the Ratlings have that's their survival strategy. They are adorable, and so they beg for their lives when they're threatened. And I've actually written that into the description of the Ratlings, is that like Ratlings try to be as adorable and endearing as possible when they think it's the best way for them to survive. So you might get a Rat Prince in your own campaign. It just might be not the Rat Prince.
Mark C asks a question from our patron. Oftentimes during combat, spells or abilities take place and force player characters to make ability checks. How lenient should you be with interchangeably using strength or dex based on what the specific character is known for? How would this decision affect interchanging checks like perception versus investigation based on their ability scores as well? I could answer a little bit of this if you.
Yeah, what do you think?
Don't mind. Specifically with perception versus investigation, I actually differentiate these two more so than another one that I'm going to talk about in a second. But perception is what you see, hear, smell, taste. It's the sensory options. What are you listening for? What are you looking for? Investigation is when you are trying to find clues given a certain scenario. So if you arrive on a crime scene and you say, I want to roll perception, it's what do you see at a glance around the room? If you're like, I want to find footprints in the dust to tell me what kind of creatures were here, that's looking for something specific in the scenario, and that's an investigation. This is different than strength and dexterity, where I use acrobatics and athletics interchangeably, but the character needs to decide and say how they're interacting with that. If a character says, I'm going to jump up this wall, but I'm going to do it by like grabbing a chandelier rope, cutting it and like swinging over or something, versus I'm going to scale the wall regularly. One is looking for athletics. One is looking for acrobatics. And if they can give me a reason to give them the one they're better at, I will let them have it.
I think that's a great answer. I'm only going to add two things. If a spell or ability specifically says, make this skill check, make this ability check, don't be lenient. Like, breaking out of web is this to break out, this to get it. I actually forget off the top of my head which is which. But like, for a spell, you don't need to change it. And I wouldn't, because that's part of the balance of the spell. Like, if you let someone break out of a web that requires strength to break out with dexterity, you basically just nerf the spell, didn't you? Right? Because like, dexterity saving throws are usually one thing and one thing or another. But it's up to you. If you want to do that, then that's fine. I like to go with this rule of thumb. Perception takes 6 seconds. Investigation takes 60 seconds, right? An investigation check is something that takes you a couple minutes to do. A perception check is something that you do the moment you walk into the room. And in that respect, I think that one of the really good ways to use perception is think of perception like your character's spidey sense, right? Like, in a lot of ways, perception is more interesting if you think of it like a saving throw, or like, did you know, like, and wait until a trigger moment before you ask for the perception check. Like, did you notice the assassin before they drew the dagger? Perception. Did you notice the trap before you stepped on it? Perception. That's a cool way of using perception, like a saving throw, instead of like, one thing that I hate is when players say, I would like to perception the room, please.
Yeah.
No.
It's much more fun when you, when the DM is supposed to be the one who asks for the rolls, you just describe your actions. And I always find that that's more fun. And like when it comes to traps, if you can see the trap, that's perception. If you found the trap and would like to figure out how to disarm it, that's investigation.
Yeah.
So now we're going to move on to just chat questions for the last 10 minutes. We'll see how we do here. Do you guys prefer running separate session zeros for each player, or one group session zero with everyone in the group? I think generally speaking, if you had to pick one, I would do the group, but we do both.
Yeah, we do. I would say one of the things that I would say is that it's session zero when everybody is there together. I think that we need a different name for it when it's the one-on-one. Like, I think of it like this. I have a one-on-one with the players, but I have a session zero with the group. Right? I wouldn't call the one-on-ones that I have with a player a session zero.
Yeah. And that's fair. But if you're looking for insight into like the start of Drakenheim campaigns, we have a group session together where we all decide on our characters. We talk about how they know each other, how they interact with the world, and Monty gives us feedback to help integrate them into the campaign. Then what happens is we come up with our backstories, we flesh them out, and then we have one-on-ones with Monty where we look at our backstories and talk about what secrets and mysteries are going to be unveiled during the campaign from our characters. So those are kind of how we differentiate them.
Mm-hmm. Zero's Theory asked, if you allowed a PC to receive a powerful magic item that they had requested, then they abused its power, should you consider plotting a way to remove it, knowing it would upset them? No, I would talk to the player and say that I made a mistake. I would just say, I'm sorry. I would just say, Kelly, I'm really sorry, but like, I should not have given you the Staff of the Magi. That was a mistake.
I wish I had the guts to have done that. We've heard the story many times. In my first campaign that I ever ran, I gave Jill boots of flying at like level 4, and she was a ranger and she was killing everything from the air. And I tried to write it in, but I didn't want to be a jerk and be like, give me those back. So I wrote a dragon. When they met the dragons, they had this dealing, and there was an option for her to give one of the dragons her boots of flying as a treasure to kind of persuade the dragons to work with them. Mm-hmm. And she decided not to. And that was fine. And she kept the boots of flying. But if you gave the item, see, even that didn't work. And I felt like it would have been too mean of a move to be like, give it back or we kill you.
A player character, if you take a magic item away from a player, unless you give them the choice, they're always going to feel like you did it on purpose and that you betrayed them. So just cut the middleman and just apologize. Like, meet with the player one-on-one and say, look, I'm really sorry, but I should not have done this. It's a mistake. I wish there was a way to balance it, but like, and then work with the player to come up with a narrative reason. But you got to be honest. In your situation, it sounds like I think you should just be honest with the player and say it was a mistake and just apologize. They're going to be upset, but if you apologize, hopefully they understand.
We have a question here. Would the Dungeon Dudes crew ever consider running Lost Mine of Phandelver or another pre-built setting for fun during the break? Not during the break. It's been a thought, but It's a very back burner thought. We're too focused, I think, on what we're working on now, and we do want to play the other modules, but playing them all the way through would take a heap of time. And what I could see us maybe doing in the future, and something that's being tossed around, again, this is nothing official. I don't have any dates. I can't tell you if this will actually happen, but we're hoping that we could do more collaborations and charity streams in the future. And those might incorporate maybe sections of pre-written modules. I could see us doing like Castle Ravenloft Halloween event or something like wild like that.
Yeah.
Again, that's just a spitballing idea, but yeah. I will also quickly answer. A lot of people are asking about my mustache. Wilhelm is on break. The mustache is hard to maintain. I enjoy having it, but because I'm on holidays, I decided to just let my facial hair do its normal thing. The mustache will return when Drakenheim returns.
Yeah, yeah.
Or specifically Shadows.
Okay, so we a few more recent questions here. Just scrolling down a little. We got a lot of great questions, and I wish we could get to everybody, but it's always so hard. Clonon asked, which is the question we get a lot, which I would like to answer. Are we going to see a class or subclass modifications in the book, such as the Delirium Warlock? The answer to this question originally was maybe, but it's increasingly looking like a no. Sorry to disappoint. And in particular, Delirium is not mysterious if a player can take a subclass built around it. Flat out, it kind of kills the mystery if a player can take, because then I probably have to explain too much, and Delirium is too new in the world for there to be a... It's complicated, but like right now my inclination is probably like probably not, but with a lot of cool suggestions for how to still give your characters lots of flavor and make them feel like they're connected to the world, but probably not a subclass built around Delirium. I have ideas for this sort of thing, but I'm kind of leaning towards making it a little bit more open-ended.
If I could add to that, I have an opinion and a plug. So the opinion is we are going to be focusing a lot more on backgrounds and connecting your characters through that to the world of Drakenheim. What we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that any class and subclass you play fits in Drakenheim. So by steering away from creating our own subclasses, we're actually broadening the options, because instead of saying, well, you're going to want to play a Drakenheim subclass, play any of them and use flavor text like we did to make them connected to the story. As a plug, if you are looking for new subclasses, something great, since we are partnered with Ghostfire Games, we actually were laughing in a chat with them the other day about the fact that the subclasses that we created, and a lot of the subclasses going into their new book for Grimhollow, are actually wildly appropriate. If you just use a little bit of flavor text, you can make them very Drakenheim oriented subclasses. So Grimhollow and Drakenheim are actually going to be able to be kind of partners in crime, and we wrote 6 of the subclasses for their new book. So
yeah, and the challenge is like, because we're writing under the open gaming license, we can't use a lot of the subclasses that have already been published in official material, even though those subclasses are probably the best way to implement some of these things. Like the Aberrant Soul Sorcerer,
yes,
is perfect. It's bang on. I just can't put that in the book because it's not OGL, right? So like it's kind of that sort of thing where like what we're more leaning towards is giving you lots of tools as a player and a dungeon master to connect your characters really strongly to the world and its mysteries that transcend the mechanics of the classes, so that it feels more like it's part of the story, and that you're not like, because we want every character to feel like they're connected, right? So there's kind of this other design problem where it's like, oh, if you have a player in your campaign that doesn't play one of our subclasses, are they missing out on some of the story? Yeah, so it's also kind of like there's a lot of reasons why. Yes, there's some cool subclass ideas. A lot of the ideas that we were exploring as well, we might just put them out in another way, so that, because at the same time, if I make a subclass that is super tied to Drakenheim and Delirium and the story, then it's really hard to take that subclass and play it in a not Drakenheim campaign. So it's a balance of those things. This book is going to be chock full of stuff on the player side of things, so bear with us on that.
Yeah, there'll be great player options, and I'm trying to make backgrounds a little bit more important in this setting. To answer a few questions in here, I saw that Pearly Gatekeeper asked, how detailed will the description of the Amethyst Academy Tower and the castle be? What I will tell you is that there are core locations in the setting of Drakenheim, and without even naming them, I'm sure you guys know what the core locations are. They were the big deals of the campaign. Those are going to be completely fleshed out and will be pivotal moments for any Drakenheim campaign.
Yeah, like, to ask, the Amethyst Academy Tower is roughly the size of the Empire State Building. And so a lot of it, actually, what I've written for that is, here's how to randomly generate a floor of the Amethyst Academy Tower. But then here's the important parts.
I say that we have time for one more. It's just after 8 o'clock. I know that we had a few hiccups with our technology, so I'm willing to spend a few minutes.
Yeah.
Let's answer one more good question. And do you have one ready? Because I'm still kind of scrolling here.
I do not have one quite ready yet. So
all right, let's see what we can find. Is it? Oh, we don't know the answer to that one, so I'm not going to answer it.
Sorry about that.
Anybody got a final question?
Let's just go back up a little bit further and see if we can't find another neat one. Oh, it's tricky. Oh, we did get through a fair amount, didn't we? Thank you all so much for the awesome questions. Do you have one, Kelly?
Here's a good last question. Might there be a second book eventually that will focus on the larger world? That's the dream.
But let's get the first one done first.
Yeah. Our focus is definitely on the first one, but I will tell you that Monty and I have meetings where we dream big, and our pie in the sky goal is that, yes, we will be able to share the entire world that we are creating together with all of you through subsequent releases, if that becomes a possibility.
Yeah. There's another question about, like, that was showing concern about, oh, well, what if do you need the larger world to make characters? Well, this is a module, so the way that Drakenheim is being written, the way we're writing the book, is that the player character backstories will give your players everything they need to know about the larger world to make characters that are coming to Drakenheim. The story is about these characters coming to Drakenheim and their adventures in Drakenheim. So the larger world is, because I didn't have the larger world fleshed out when I started the campaign, so you don't need it. You could, if you wanted to, take Drakenheim and drop it. You could replace all of Drakenheim with, you could just say Drakenheim is Waterdeep. You could say that Drakenheim is Sharn. You could put Drakenheim in Dark Sun. The way that the book is being written is you could put it into your homebrew world and run it, and it would work. You'd have to file off some serial numbers here and there, but you could go through, you could change the names, you could modify a few things, and it would work really easily in your own homebrew world. That's something that is really important to us as we're constructing this. So while it is grounded in the world that we've created, we're trying to make sure that it's really clear where the docking points are, so that if you do want to change things, and you should change things, you should make it your own. We want to make sure that it's clear. Okay, so here's what we did. Here's how you might change it.
It's a little bit after 8 o'clock. I do see a lot of people asking about Jill's baby. For those of you who don't know, one of the reasons why we are on a break, not only is it the holidays, but we're giving Jill time with her new baby. And we're really happy to announce that Jill is home safe and sound with her partner and new baby. They are experiencing the wonderful joys and lessons of new parenthood. And I've been in touch with both of them a couple times. They're pretty busy figuring out everything that's going on. But yes, everybody is healthy. Everybody is happy. And the baby, who is a girl and is Giselle Rose Denitis. And so they have been welcomed to the world, and we're all very excited. And Jill's been in touch. She can't wait to get back, but we're going to give her a little bit of time to get things in order. So
exactly, and give them all their due to really enjoy. What a world to enter into. But it's wonderful to see so much light and happiness, and I was so flattered. Jill sent me the photos, and it was like, wow, I was so happy for her. I'm so pleased, and it was so relieving to know as well that it sounds like everything went really smoothly too.
Yeah, and I mean we're a pretty close group of friends, so I think we're all now weird nerdy uncles, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
There's a few more questions coming in. We are going to be wrapping up for the day. I did see a question though that I will give a short answer to. Is there a chance that we're going to see Monty play a character in Kelly DM? Maybe. There's talk. There's discussion.
Kelly's worked on an all new location with a cool new character that we might put in the book, and he's going to run it, and I'm going to play a character.
And we're going to let Monty poke holes in whatever it is that I wrote for Drakenheim, and this is going to be our playtest. So Monty's going to run the section, an adventure section that I am writing, and we're going to see how it goes and how it fits into the book.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, with that, I think we will wrap up for this evening. This has been so much fun to chat with everybody once again. Great questions. Thank you so much to our patrons, as always. We have an amazing community here on Patreon, and that you can join by following the links in the description below, or at patreon.com/dungeondudes. What else should people check out, Kelly, from us?
Well, first of all, make sure to check out Drakenheim.com. And please, if you're interested in the book, sign up for our email list. It's really actually important to us. We do not plan to spam you with emails. We plan to give some specific updates as the Kickstarter comes into existence. And the email list helps us get an idea of how many people are interested in the book. That way we can start to set our own expectations for what sort of things we need to deliver.
We really want to put a lot of amazing energy and effort into this book, and the mailing list is a good way for us to figure out what to expect, because we are shooting for the moon right now with our ideas, and so hopefully we can deliver all that.
Yeah, and other than that, check out Dungeons of Drakenheim on YouTube or on podcasts if you are not currently watching. I will say that it's something that both Monty and I are extremely proud of, and it's been an absolute blast. We are now, I'm going to say, roughly halfway through Shadows of Drakenheim, which has also proven to be an absolute joy. So if you're not caught up on those series, definitely check them out on YouTube or on podcasts. You can also check out Untold Tales of Drakenheim, which is available on YouTube. And that is some side stories that might fill the gap while you wait for us to come back with more Untold Tales, where we will be playtesting new locations never before seen, and also trying out some of the Tasha's specific subclasses to try them out. See how it goes.
And of course, we post new videos every Thursday on our YouTube channel where we cover everything in D&D. Check it out at youtube.com/dungeondudes. We got new episodes coming on next week, this week, every week. The D&D train don't stop on the Dungeon Dudes channel.
For the rest of our lives, new episodes, 1 million episodes, just Kelly and Monty.
Kelly and Monty forever. 20 seasons.
And with that,
Thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time in the
dungeon.
dungeon.